Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for coming out tonight. My name is Jody Harrop, and I'm on the board of Equality Downers Grove. We are thrilled to see you all here tonight for the kickoff event for One Book, One Town. And we are incredibly fortunate to have the author himself, David Levithan, joining us virtually tonight for a discussion of his work, Answers in the Pages. We were inspired to develop One Book, One Town in response to the alarming increase in division and hostility toward the LGBTQ+ community, both nationally and locally. Even here in Downers Grove, we've dealt with book ban challenges, transphobia, and threats of violence towards institutions that support marginalized groups. It is our hope that through this community-wide conversation, we can bring people together and begin a dialogue promoting perspective-taking, empathy, and inclusion, and focus more on the commonalities that unite us than on the differences that divide us.
Hi, I'm Debbie Anderson-Phillips, and I'm also on the board of EQBG. We feel so fortunate to have been able to partner with the Downers Grove Library. They have put in so many hours to help us get this One Book, One Town event up and running, and we couldn't thank them more. In particular, we'd like to thank Karen Bonerick, Cindy Contry, and Amanda Hunt. So tonight's co-facilitators who will be steering this discussion are Amanda and David Secchi, along with David Levithan. They will steer our discussion. We know that you may have questions for the author, and we want, when the facilitators indicate it's time for questions, you can either say your question out loud, speaking towards that mic, I believe. Or if you don't want to ask your question aloud, you can raise your hand and Jody are around with pencil and paper. So this, just a bit of technology, this is the OWL. As you speak, it's going to turn to the person who's speaking, and then Dave will be able to see that person. So hopefully, if you're speaking, the camera will turn to you so he can have an idea of who we're discussing with. For the audio to work best, it's important for one person to speak at a time. Please don't speak over each other. And while we welcome questions of many different viewpoints, we ask that all questions and all comments are posed with respect. And great,
all right, well, tonight we are honored to host a discussion with David Levithan, an award-winning author whose groundbreaking works include Boy Meets Boy, Nick and Nora's Infinite Playlist, Every Day, the Dash and Lily series, Will Grayson, and Answers in the Pages, the book we are here to celebrate tonight. 6 of David's books have won or been finalists for the Lambda Literary Award for Children's and Young Adult Literature, making him the most celebrated author in this category. David has also received the Margaret A. Edwards Award for his seminal contributions to young adult literature. He is currently a publisher and editorial director at Scholastic, and is the founding editor of Push, a young adult imprint of Scholastic Press dedicated to discovering new and exciting voices in teen literature. Over the past 20 years, David's groundbreaking works have challenged the stereotypical literary depiction of gay teens by presenting strong gay characters with complex emotions and powerful storyline arcs, while also remaining engaging and accessible to all audiences. His works give a voice to teens who often feel marginalized and offer inspiration for them to accept themselves just as they are. We are thrilled and honored that David is joining us tonight to discuss his work, to share his perspectives, and to inspire a productive conversation around the work we need to do to come together as a strong, caring, and inclusive community. So without further ado, I'll pass this off to David.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. It's amazing what your organization is doing, and it's amazing what you've organized around the book. It was really exciting to hear all the places that the conversations are happening, and all of the ways that you've made the book available to the community. That is a model of how these things should be done, and it's exciting to be a part of it. I definitely, like, literally, I feel like a talking head right now. It's very strange to see the screen. The owl keeps shaking. You might see me get seasick because it just keeps going back and forth. All good. It's all good. Technology, ain't it great? But I do appreciate that it does allow me to be with you, even if I'm not physically with you. And that has certainly been a story of the past couple of years in terms of following our books out into the world, and what a world we are following into. So I'm going to just briefly talk a little bit about Answers in the Pages. I mean, that's why you have me here, and sort of where it came from and what is that world that it has come out into. It has a very strange origin story. Basically, when the pandemic hit in March of 2020, and I locked down here at my mom's house in Short Hills, New Jersey, and turned this, my dad's old desk, into my desk. I had been just about to start a really intensive, emotional, very deeply researched novel that very much was not what I wanted to write while I was under lockdown. I knew the sort of emotional limits I had, and what I could give to my writing, and the idea of doing something that was going to be arduous, but in a rewarding way, I just didn't think I could take it on. So in October of 2020, I'd finished up the books I was working on, but I hadn't started something new since the pandemic had began. And I did something that I've never done before. I went on a writing retreat with one of my friends, Mike. We went up to Woodstock, put our masks on, and basically I went and I opened up my computer and I opened every single start of a novel I had on my laptop. Any random few lines, any random chapter I'd written and then abandoned, anything that had fallen away. And in that search, I found what turned out to be the opening chapter of Answers in the Pages. It was this boy, who later I would name Donovan, saying that, well, in this town, there is this sentence in the back at the very end of a book that, depending on how you read it, you feel different ways about it. And it divided the community that he was in. And it ended up being a story that he knows because his mom was the one who started everything off, because he left it on the counter. And I immediately was like, oh yeah, this. I was like, oh, I started this a year or two ago, and then looked at the timestamp, and it had actually been sitting in my computer for over 4 years. But I knew immediately this was the book that I wanted to write. It was the book that would bring me joy and sort of let me engage with the world in a way that I wanted to, rather than one that would be emotionally taxing. And it started because my first book was called Boy Meets Boy. It came out 20 years ago this September. And as you can guess, for a book called Boy Meets Boy, there was some resistance to it at first. And so basically from the very start of my career, I was very conversant with book challenges, with censorship that happened once a book got onto the shelves, censorship preemptive that happened before a book could get to the shelves. And so just by dint of being a queer author who's titled his book with a very queer title, I very much knew about the world of book challenges. And I will say that I've always been fascinated by these book challenges, because I always state this figure, it is still to this day true. I've talked to many, I know the head of the Freedom to Read Foundation, the ALA, NCAC, all the organizations. I always ask the people in the intellectual freedom offices, have you ever heard of a challenge that was brought by a student? And the answer is no. It is always a parent or another adult in the community or from outside the community that makes the challenge. And because of that, I always wonder, what would it be like to be that kid whose mom is the one who is challenging a book? Because that dynamic's always fascinated me. It is in the name of protecting them, but more often than not, the kid actually doesn't need the protection that is being offered. And in fact, it is standing in the way of them getting the education that they deserve. So I wanted to sort of talk about that, but I also wanted to write a book where the challenge is well intentioned. That the mother genuinely believes, because this used to be the case. Usually with book challenges, the parent who is making the challenge did genuinely believe that the book would cause their child harm, which again is wrong. Again, especially in terms of LGBT or BIPOC books, they don't cause harm. But again, there was this feeling that it might. And so I was like, okay, I want to go in there and examine that. So I wrote the book. Obviously, hopefully you've read it. It's in 3 parts. I wanted both Donovan's story and the story of the book challenge and the defense of the book that comes from the students. I wanted you to be reading the book itself that is challenged, so you can figure out, should it be challenged, should it not be challenged? And then there was this third element, this love story that started at first just because I wanted a happy love story in there to balance off all of the tension and conflict, and then grew to end up be a part of the greater narrative as well. And that's where that came from. And I will admit, I mean, this is where it gets a little weird, because I wrote the book in 2020, early 2021. And in between me handing in the book, probably, let's say, summer of 2021, and the book coming out in summer of 2022, the landscape of book challenges and so the world we're living in drastically changed. And this is because book challenges have gone from that very localized, misguided yet sincere belief in challenging a book as a way of protecting a child to becoming a political tool. Book challenges have become completely politicized. You guys do not need me to tell you this, you know. But again, without a sincere conviction behind it, more a political conviction behind it. And of course, what we see time and again is that LGBTQIA plus novels and BIPOC novels, or novels written by BIPOC creators, and I say novels, also nonfiction, is challenged. Purely because they think that our books are easy targets and that they can bolster their political fortunes by attacking our books. And then there is sort of the dark underbelly, which is it is a sort of insidious effort to try to overthrow public education and public libraries. So that is the fight that we're in. Again, I think if I wrote this book now, it would have to be a different book because the forces would be different. But I'm glad I wrote it the way I did, because what I do want is for there to be a conversation. Because I do think that we see time and time again in polls that people, by and large, do not believe in censoring books or keeping books out of the hands of children. The mass majority of people who are polled believe that. And again, having these dialogues is important to sort of say, why is this happening? And to make sure to support the children in the community who are represented by the books that are being challenged. It is both a scary and exciting time in terms of publishing. Again, just in case it is not on your radar, the last extensive survey done of book challenges was by PEN America. It does go only up until last August, so we're due for another survey soon. And it said that basically there had been registered over 2,500 challenges, a huge spike in number of challenges in schools and school libraries. On top of that, the ALA has also tracked about 800 challenges in the same period in libraries. Now, on the one hand, that's really scary. That is, a lot of books are under attack, and really, it isn't the books themselves that are under attack so much as the identities that they represent. But also, because I do like to be positive as well, I say as an author and a publisher, it is really exciting to me because those 2,500 books represent 1,800 authors. And when I hear that, I don't think just, oh God, that they're attacking a lot of us. I think, oh, it's amazing that so many of us are telling these stories and that there is so much um, of the underrepresented voices, of the BIPOC and LGBTQIA voices that are coming out that weren't there 20 years ago. When I started, I always joke that Brett Hartinger, another queer YA author, said, "Welcome to the queer YA club. There are now 8 of us." Well, now there are thousands of us. And there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of readers. So I do think that we defend our books actually from a position of strength, not of weakness, and that we just have to fight the good fight, because, again, this is a political battle. And it is one that, unfortunately, too often divides communities and causes there to be sort of outpourings of animus, when really what these books are about is empathy. And what libraries are trying to do and schools are trying to do is educate kids towards empathy, not away from it. So that's sort of my overview of sort of where the book came from and what it means to me and sort of the world that it came into. But again, I always like answering questions more than I like monologuing as a talking head. So I look forward to your questions.
David, just to clarify, is it okay if we call you David, or would you prefer like grand talking head?
I mean, you can call me David as long as I'll think you mean David Byrne, not me, and therefore I will be a talking head.
You've introduced
My beautiful house. This is not my beautiful wife.
You've introduced obviously the topic of censorship. I'm just wondering if we want to start there as a conversation point with the novel and see how you felt about the issues presented here in novel form and what resonated with you in that conversation. And of course, as you're talking, when we have questions, we confirm with Dave.
This is the microphone here, so if you're in the back, feel free to come on up when you want to speak to make sure that your voice is heard too. And things in the back might be hard to reach here, but so, okay.
I'll start. My name is Rick Roche. I'm a former librarian, retired librarian. I still am a librarian. But I appreciated the book very much. I thought it was an interesting read. I've been helping when I was helping kids from all ages and from all viewpoints. As I read it, I thought it was a lovely story, very sweet. My only problem at the end was I thought, oh gosh, they all accepted it so easily. And I think the world is harder than was in the book. And now you've said that you would write something different a year later. And I'm thinking, is that some of the same thoughts? Oh.
Thank you. Yes, now once you're a librarian, you're never not a librarian. There's no such thing as a former librarian. I've never met one. But no, I think there is, I think I would write it differently just to outline the different power structures behind the challenge. I don't know that I would change the ending. I mean, obviously in the school board meeting at the end, I certainly wanted there to be some voices there that were saying things that were not right, because I didn't want to sugarcoat sort of what the opposition does sometimes say, while at the same time it was important to me that the mother would clearly be horrified at what she had started by doing the challenge and letting these voices speak, and I wanted the voices to be countered. But I think in terms of the ending, I think ultimately the important thing to keep in mind is I wrote this book for middle school. I mean, or middle grade, middle school, for kids who are just new to this issue. And I think I know that it was important to me to give them hope, because I think that is what is really important in our literature, especially at that age level, is to show them the possibility of change, show them that their actions matter, show them that by speaking out, they will be heard. And so to me, the ending was always going to be positive because I want to encourage the kids who read this book to feel like they can take the same actions that some of the students in the book do, and that they will be met with support. Because by and large, the students who do speak out, again, there's certainly some communities where even fifth graders are shouted down, but even when the other side is even attacking children, there is always the support for the children who are speaking. And there is always a sense that they are doing the right thing by defending the books or defending their fellow classmates, defending their own identity by speaking up. So I think if I wrote it again now, again, I think I'd be more up to date about what they were up against, but the victory would still be there and would still be as sweet. If I were writing a YA or an adult novel about it, I think it would be a much more complicated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Lisa. Loved your book. I guess the one thing I'm curious about is, you say that this is a book for junior high. I'm curious why you chose Rick and Oliver to be fifth graders. And I feel like I thought their relationship was so sweet, but then when it got into like in fifth grade and them laying on his bed and they were always kissing and then they spent the night together laying in each other's arms, I was kind of like, oh my God, they're in fifth grade. I'm so curious why you chose them to be that age, I guess.
Yeah, I think I wanted to. Ideally, when I think about middle grade, fifth grade is sort of the sweet spot for middle grade. So it's more middle school than junior high. And I did want there to be that sort of innocent level of first love. I certainly wanted them to kiss, and I certainly did not want them to do anything beyond kissing. I wanted it to just be sort of that sweet, cuddling, let's not do anything else state. Which again, I think is what sort of that first love can be. And I think that, again, I wanted also to mirror that in middle grade, there's plenty of stories where boys and girls do that all the time. And it is just sort of innocent and sweet. Again, in my mind, like when they fall asleep, they really just fall asleep. There's nothing else that goes on in that bed besides
No, I
sleep.
didn't think that there was. I don't know. I guess I was not doing that in fifth grade, maybe. I wouldn't want my kids doing. I think it's cute to have crushes, but I just, I don't know. I was just kind of like, oh God, they're in fifth grade. I don't care. It's not, it has a moot point about like what gender it is,
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Tina, and I was wondering, do you ever think there's a circumstance where censorship is okay in a school library as opposed to a public library?
I think, again, there are always pedagogical reasons for books not to be in a library. The most obvious one being age level. My book, Two Boys Kissing, again, is always on the banned books list. I personally agree that it should not be in an elementary school. I don't think an elementary school reader would have the capacity to actually understand what is going on in that book. So it's not that I think it should be pulled from elementary book school shelves. I would have put it in an elementary school to begin with because it's a teen book. And I love it when people ask me like, well, what age are your YA teen books for? And I'm like, well, teenagers. That there is an actual mathematical definition of teenager. And so when people are like, well, you're promoting it to 8-year-olds, I'm like, no, I genuinely am not promoting my YA books to 8-year-olds, because if I were, they wouldn't be teen books. So I think in that regard, I think that is always an appropriate conversation to have about whether a certain audience would be ready for a book or not. And certainly I would not want to stock an elementary school with YA or adult books. But I think when something is the right age level and has literary merit, I think that is where you can't let your viewpoint agenda get in the way of what books go in there. I mean, I again, always talk about, there was a whole kerfuffle in publishing, it seems like years and years ago, when Rush Limbaugh did his series of children's books. And there were some people who were like, oh, well, Rush Limbaugh, we can't have those children's books in libraries. And I said, no, you have to be accepting of all viewpoints, that those books were written at an appropriate age level. And so there was no reason other than purely a philosophical one to keep them out of libraries. And I felt that was wrong to keep them out of libraries. Would I have checked it out or advocated for checking it out? No, but I do think that libraries and school libraries are meant to represent all viewpoints, and then let the readers decide what they want to read and what they don't want to read.
Yeah, I guess my question stems from, maybe you've heard that our town had a book challenge at the high school level. And, the book is, I don't know whether to look at the screen or look at this out. The book level technically says 18, but it's high school. And so there are some high school level,
Yeah.
kids that are 18. And so it was a big divisive thing for our community. So, this is nice that this conversation is happening.
Yeah, again, I think it always has to be a conversation. And again, I think the line between high school and adult is so much blurrier than the line between middle grade or middle school and high school and adult. I believe, I agree with you. There are plenty of high schoolers who can read adult books or things that are 18 plus and get a lot out of them.
Yeah, I wonder in terms of give and the age level and everything, what people thought about seeing the book ban through Donovan's eyes. That's something that struck me as an adult reading the book, but in the mind of a young child kind of experiencing this and seeing it, if that resonated with you or if it made you think differently, it made me think differently. I like books, young adult, middle grade, that get you inside the head of a kid when they're starting to realize that adults don't always have the world entirely figured out perfectly aligned.
Yeah, because he didn't even understand, even when he grabbed the book and read the last page, he still didn't understand what the issue was. So, yeah, he's very innocent and didn't even think twice about it. It's the adults that put the thoughts and the drama into some situations.
And I think we're being naive if we think that we can't learn from kids and their perspectives, I think that, I don't know, I feel like my kids are so much smarter than I was when I was at their age, just because of what they're, there's so much more information that they are, is available to them. And I feel like when I can have, for years, my kids are 20 and 18, but for years, I've been able to have really interesting conversations with them about this stuff, and they offer perspectives that my husband and I will be like, oh, yeah, you're right. Okay. So.
I thought you did an excellent job of showing those kids being able to use their resources that are readily available to them. And they were able to round up those resources to try and figure out some of the questions or some of the answers. I thought that was very good. I enjoyed that part.
One of the things that I thought was really, can you hear me, David?
Yep.
One one of the things that I thought was really very real is that Donovan loved his family and his family loved him. And they soared through it, you know, and they still are a family. And even though there's disagreement between Donovan and his mom in particular, and his dad is just sort of like trying to navigate this thing, you know, yeah, that was very well done too. I have seen this. But Donovan was really frustrated, but he was not, he did not hate his mom, right? Mm-hmm. And she didn't understand where he was coming from, but eventually she did, because he spoke a truth to her, right? And was able to articulate why he thought this was okay, that they be allowed to read the adventures. And so I think that was a very beautiful piece of this book, and a very informative to us, I think, as a community, that you can still be together and you can walk through a fire together and get to the other side. And that's really what it was like for me to watch Donovan's path and his colleagues, his friends.
Well, I think, I mean, right now, I mean, and that was obviously an incredibly deliberate choice on my part, that I wanted to write a book where there is sort of the nuclear option, and none of them, it's not just that they don't use the nuclear option, they don't actually even go near the nuclear option. Mm-hmm. Because I feel that right now in our society, we go nuclear way too easily. And of course, to extend the metaphor, we all know the only thing that ever happens if you go nuclear is you just destroy everything around you. And so I wanted to show that, yes, that especially to now switch my use of the word nuclear, in their nuclear family, that there was, the love was going to carry them, that there was not going to be a big breach. There was certainly going to be disagreement, but at the same time, to sort of the earlier point, what Donovan had to learn was self-advocacy. That if you have a parent who will listen to you, sometimes what you have to do, even if they're not asking you to talk, and in fact, they don't want to bring up the subject because they think that they're protecting you from the subject, sometimes the best course of action is to talk anyway, and to show them that you do actually understand what's happening, and that the thing that they're trying to protect you from actually isn't a threat at all and isn't going to harm you. Because that is the way to prevent the bomb from going off. And so there are many different stories that I could have told about a family in a book challenge, and it could have been tearing everything apart. But what I really wanted to show was that wasn't necessary. And that, again, it is much about, it's not just about, most of the time, and God knows I did it in this book, most of the time, it is about speaking up at that big meeting. That's the climax, when the hero finally finds their voice and speaks up in front of the whole town and tells them what's what. Well, I wanted to show, because I genuinely believe it, that speaking up at the kitchen table is just as important, if not more important, and that the change actually happens more when you speak up at the kitchen table than necessarily when you speak up at the big town meeting.
And I think part of what made that so powerful and so poignant was Mom at the meeting choosing not to talk at all, rather than Mom, having this magical turnaround and coming out in Donovan's position. She chose to really just truly listen and think and reflect. And I think that was such a powerful piece of the story.
I think, can you hear me back here?
Yep.
The thing I came away with more than anything else was that in the end, it doesn't matter. And these kids were all fighting a battle that they chose to fight, but at the beginning of it and at the middle and even at the end, their overall philosophy was, what difference does it make if you're queer, if you're not, if you're in love, you're in love, and it doesn't really matter. And that, to me, that was a huge overall message that I took away, because if everybody can get to that, subject is over. But, you know, the adults in there, the kids more than the adults were pretty much with this shouldn't make a difference, and it doesn't matter actually if these two boys at the end were queer or in love or not. That shouldn't make a difference. The difference is it was their right to do whatever they wanted. So that's what I took away, was that it shouldn't matter more than anything else.
Yeah, and I mean, and that totally goes to the earlier point made about sort of how the next generation is smarter than we are and more adaptable than we are, and sort of knows what's what more than we do. Because, again, a lot of the times I talk about censorship and go places, and one question that I'm asked a lot is sort of, what gives you hope? Like, what things are so bad right now? What is giving you hope? And I always say, and pretty much every author I know has the same answer, which is like, oh, just talk to the students, like talk to the kids. Like, if that doesn't give you hope, nothing will, because they look at this and just don't understand what the adults are doing. They genuinely are like, I don't understand how you think these books will harm me. I mean, and I think that we as adults often react that way the most when it is a book that we already cherish. When you see that Anne Frank's diary is on a banned books list, you're like, I can't understand the universe in which Anne Frank's diary is on a banned books list. But in truth, when the students look at these lists, they feel that way about all of the books on the list. They're like, I don't understand why any of these books are on your list and what you're trying to protect me from here. These all seem totally fine to me. Why are you doing this? So I do think that again, I wanted to make sure that in the book that when it came to the kids talking, you're absolutely right. It is no big deal to them. They genuinely don't understand. They're like excited that something's happening, but at the same time, they really don't understand what's happening. I also very subtly wanted to point out that obviously nothing would have made them read that book more than the conversation about it. And so that's why suddenly the bootleg copies, or the kids who still have copies, become very popular, because that also is what happens, is that when books are challenged, it does spark curiosity in the students, which is, of course, the opposite of what the people who want to pull the books are trying to do.
And when we talk about kids not really making it an issue, we're talking about because of the exposure they've had. So when I think back to my 5th grade and 6th grade years in the 70s and being a gay kid, I was acculturated in a straight world, expected to be straight. We didn't even talk about gay back then. But boys and girls were talking about crushes, and they were talking about, and I thought for myself, well, that's just not a reality. I couldn't even imagine in my life ever being able to kiss another man, because generationally, it was just so taboo. So if kids are more receptive, and they are, I worked at a high school for 21 years as a guidance counselor. We had a Gay Straight Alliance. That did a lot of good for not only the kids that were LGBTQ+, to come and just put their baggage on the floor for an hour and a half you could see them just physically drop the mask and just be with one another. But it did a lot for exposure for the other kids to know, hey, these kids exist. They're really not that different from us. So it's definitely a generational thing. But I definitely wish I had literature like this when I was young, because I was completely on an island until I was old enough to go to my first gay bar. I never knew another gay person my entire life until that happened. And it would have been a real gift to have had exposure. That's why I just don't understand these book bans. Like you said, if it's appropriate to the age level, we need to expose kids. The same thing happened in my career as an educator with special needs kids. Before, I actually taught before there was full inclusion. The kids that benefited most from those kids that came in with difficulties of all sorts, physical, mental, were the general population. They stopped seeing them as freaks, and they started to just recognize their humanity. So it's just so important that we just explore diversity It's just crazy what's going on in the world. I know just in Florida, they've just, so there's a policy now where they can't include the word diversity, inclusion, or equity in any governmental document. I mean, this is just craziness. We need to be celebrating one another. The other thing that I really related to in your book, because it was true in my case, was when the gay teacher said that it's important for me to be here as a, you know, so you can witness me as a gay man, as a teacher. How can I really teach you effectively if I'm not out? Unfortunately, I was an educator in a time when that was not even possible. And so I did not teach the kids the way I wanted to teach them. I was always guarded, always making sure there were no cracks in the veneer so they couldn't get in and expose me. And then I would lose my credibility and all of that. So fortunately for me, probably about the last 10 years of my career, which just ended a couple of years ago, I'm retired now, I was just able to throw the door open. And what a gift it was, not only to me, but to the kids who were LGBTQ and other kids as well, because everything is so different now. It was a whole different experience. It was such a liberating experience, such a glorious experience. It just, unfortunately, came at the end of my career, but I really wanted to touch kids so much more profoundly, but I was way too guarded. So that really hit home with me.
Thank you for that. I mean, I think the same is true for queer authors now. I mean, like, I am of the first generation of queer authors that sort of from the beginning of my career, I was like, okay, I'm gay. I'm going to go to a school. I'm going to work that into them. No, but again, it was a different time. I mean, my predecessors, many of them, I mean, sort of were the Maurice Sendaks, where they just sort of kept it very, very, very quiet because they genuinely felt that if the world knew, it would end their careers. That no school would ever have them there. And there was no way to argue that they were wrong until society changed and culture changes. But now it is so demonstrably different. And I, to your point, I think that all the schoolyard taunts and all the sort of calling kids gay as a slur or a slur related to gay, like, that was from a time where nobody knew any gay people, or they didn't know that they were around. It was the other and the monster, and trying to sort of demonize the thing you don't know as a way of instilling fear and control. And I think that in many ways is what these book bans are trying to do again, is trying to go back to demonization and trying to go back to sort of saying, go back into the closet. We don't want to see this. And again, for the younger generation, that's just not going to happen. They're not going to let that happen. And so, again, the fight over books seems to me like a fight over something that the other side has already lost, but they're still going to keep fighting just to do some damage.
I just wanted to share one more thing. I'm recently single and looking.
From what I can tell about the rest of the room, this is not the place to air that.
That wasn't the point of my saying that. That was, when I meet someone and we're dating and we're serious, I'm going to buy bags and bags of fun-sized candy bars. I just love that.
Excellent.
If I can go back to the whole generational piece of it, it seemed like that was kind of a big theme throughout the text, especially toward the end at the board meeting, was that, you made a point, it seemed like, to identify who was an older person speaking at the meeting versus who was a younger, adult versus who was a child. You mentioned the teenagers, the high schoolers as well. And something that I really liked that stood out to me was when Donovan's mom said something to the effect of, like, I was thinking about, I wouldn't have been ready for this content, not necessarily that you weren't ready for it. And so I'm wondering, a little bit about your intentionality in drawing attention to the 3 generations or so that were in the book, and kind of that messaging that evolution is taking place. And, maybe there's another layer or 10, after this, of what that true, when we finally made it, what would that look like versus, that growth that was still happening down the generations in the text.
Yeah, I mean, I did want to get across that notion of sort of that we all have preconceived notions and we base it on our own experience, that we do that all the time as adults. And that, again, it's an understandable default, even though it's not necessarily the correct default to make. And I did want to point that out. And I did, again, I wanted to make sure that the young reader knew that what Donovan's mom was doing was not coming out of nowhere. That there was, and it wasn't coming out of hate either, that it was coming out of a genuine concern, but that it was an outdated concern. And that basically that is what the kids had to do, was sort of speak up and point out how outdated the concern was. I will confess, this is always the problem of writing middle grade or young adult. Like, there definitely was that moment probably halfway through the book when I was like, oh my God, Donovan's mom is probably younger than I am. And like, what? How is that possible? So I was conscious of that. In Donovan's mom, I was writing about sort of my peers and my generation. And again, the older people protesting were the people of my parents' generation who, again, some of them, like my parents, are totally get it, but others are just clinging to not wanting anything to change. And again, they're fighting the last battle they have.
Yeah. One thing that I noticed in your book and in our own community when the book challenge happened was that the young people sort of had to stand up and be the heroes. Is that something that you noticed when you've been looking at book challenges across, or that's been your experience overall?
I mean, yes. I mean, I think the young people and the people supporting them often are the ones in the spotlight. And it's an important one. I mean, I always talk about, there was a challenge here in New Jersey, in southern Jersey, where This Book is Gay, which is a book that I wrote the introduction for and is a very highly challenged book, was one of many books challenged. And sort of the other books sort of did go through the challenge process and were put back on the shelves, but This Book is Gay was the outlier. And there was going to be a town meeting or a school board meeting about it. And I love the librarian did what librarians are so good about. She set up the bat signal. She basically said, does anybody know David Levithan? And immediately, like 2 hours later, I had emails from like 12 separate people being like, hey, this librarian's trying to get a hold of you, including through my local independent bookstore, which was actually the one that got me first. And I sort of immediately contacted her, said, hey, what can I do? And her first reaction was like, well, hey, you're in Jersey. We're an hour and a half away. This board meeting is coming up. Like, would you want to come down and talk about the book and what it means? And I said to her what I truly believe, and I believe should be standard practice for authors in that kind of situation, which is that nobody wants to hear from the author in the town. We are the outsider coming in and telling the town what is important for the town to know. We have no credibility. Whereas I said, I will happily write something, and you should pick a 16-year-old in your anti-censorship group to read my words instead, because it will mean 100 times more coming from a local youth than it would from this guy who's driving into town for 2 hours and then gets to go back home at the end of the day and not be in the town. And whenever I'm approached about a challenge to my books, again, I am always 100% in support. I 100% will do anything. And if they said, no, we really need you to come, I'm sure I'd find a way to get there or Zoom in like this. But again, I think it is much more important, because I think it is harder to ignore the kids in your community saying, no, this is what I want. It is so much harder to pretend that you're protecting them from something when they are literally standing up and saying, I am the thing that you are protecting me from. You can't protect me from gay people. I am gay. And that, again, that is, what better argument is there for our literature and for the presence of our literature than that? So again, I do think that there are kids who pick up the gauntlet. as well as plenty of kids, again, who are like, what is going on here? I don't know. I don't want to go to a meeting. Like, please deal with it. Just stop it.
It's funny, I was asking about that in particular because I feel like in some ways, as a parent now of 3 kids, like kids shouldn't have to always be the heroes in these situations. They shouldn't have to stand up for themselves. Parents should be standing up for them already. So as I happen to be the state representative for the area, so I was honored to recently pass some legislation in our house that is anti-book banning legislation, which would take away Secretary of State's library grants from any library that decides to ban books in the state of Illinois. So hopefully that'll get through our Senate. But we'll be the first state in the nation to do this. And this is like, we are the contrast to Florida, where my sister lives. And literally they have school libraries papered over with books right now where kids can't access any books. Right. Because every book has been challenged by outsiders of the community. So it's really crazy what's going on in our country right now. And I'm thankful for this literature that shines a bright light on what can happen and paths forward that we can take. But I look forward to the world where the kids don't have to be the heroes because these challenges aren't even taking place anymore. So.
Yeah. Amen to that.
Well, I anticipated before we even got started that we'd start and the hour would fly by before we even do it. Unfortunately, that time has come, David. We're gonna give you a few minutes to wrap things up and say some final words.
I will say, because we did start late, like if there are more questions, I can stay later if people want to stay later before we wrap up. Are there any other questions or thoughts people have?
Oh, I'll say one thing. So as I was reading this, I was thinking of my favorite book growing up, which was Annie on My Mind. I squealed with joy at the beginning of your acknowledgments when you shut up, because I was thinking about how I read that when I was, I don't know, 6th grade, 7th grade, and I did not have any exposure to gay people in my real life that I knew of. But that book was so formative in me becoming an advocate as a straight person and speaking up at the table, because I just had that book and that story in my mind and my heart, and it still carried it with me. And I found my dog-eared copy recently, but it's not really a question, but just I was so excited because I was thinking about it, and then your acknowledgement called it out. And it was just really nice thinking about the kids.
Yeah, I mean, Nancy was, she was the trailblazer. I mean, more than anybody else. I mean, giving everybody else credit, but she was the one who said, I don't care if my career is over, if I write out books. I don't care if you're going to attack me or try to pull me out of libraries. I'm just going to keep writing because you're trying to exhaust me, you're trying to shut me down, you're trying to make me feel bad about what I'm doing, and I refuse to let you do that. And she created a very long career, and I was very lucky that we did overlap, and I did get to talk to her a few times and really hang out with her and be on panels with her, and she was so inspiring in that regard. And again, in the book, as the acknowledgments show, many of the characters, like Donovan or Principal Woodson, are named after queer authors that came before me, because this is a battle that, again, started with just outright rebels writing these books, not knowing how they would be received, and really just defending them against a very, very hostile environment. And so their spirit definitely lives on in me and in all of the readers who have grown up on this literature. I mean, what I love more than anything else is talking to kids who truly, who love queer middle grade or queer YA, and they're like, I don't have the time to read all of them. Oh my God, there's so many. Oh my God, I love so many authors. And it's just incredible to see that they have that many possibilities, because it was in the beginning, it was 2 or 3 people opening that door or kicking down that door to let the rest of us in. And then we just kept broadening that doorway so more and more people could go in. So yeah, it was not a question. Usually when I write books, like the dedication comes last. It's something that I sort of add, and the acknowledgments I add sort of late in the process. But this one, probably the first thing I typed. It was there the whole time because Nancy Garden's spirit sort of hung over the whole thing.
Can I ask one more? Go on. But so I know we talked a lot about the censorship and the banning and, you know, some of the other themes, but we have prominently on the cover, and I know, I think in your notes at the end, you mentioned maybe it was grandma who collected turtles or something. So just, we had the turtles in the one storyline, and then we had the alligators in the other storyline. Is there, you know, anything more to share about symbolic value of those, or any other rationale behind selecting to include those in those two plot lines?
Well, I mean, the turtles came from real place. It's very funny because if I had any faith in the Wi-Fi, I would unplug this laptop and actually walk you over to the turtle collection. It literally is in the room over there. But I'm afraid that if I disconnect, then we're a goner. But yeah, so I grew up with my grandmother's turtle collection, which after she passed away, my mom inherited some of it. My aunt inherited the rest of it. So that was there. And again, that was sort of always in that storyline of the collecting turtles, as a sort of shout out to that. But again, like symbolically, it was chosen for many reasons. I mean, when you have a turtle figurine, they're never, ever, ever inside their shell. They're always outside their shell. It's always that notion of, you have a choice. You could either stay safe and just stay inside here, but if you do that, you don't ever actually go anywhere. You're just safe. Whereas if you put your head out and risk a little, then you can actually move forward and go places. That definitely was meant in that, as well as sort of the turtle and the hare. So that was really the choice there. The Florida thing, and it has become very, very, very funny now, because like it really does predate DeSantis turning into such a force of evil. But like all of my best friends are from Florida, and a running joke within us is just sort of how horrible Florida can be. So I wanted to get as many Florida jokes, and of course there had to be gators and wrestling of gators if I was going to go full Florida. But now, if anybody happens to think that the evil mastermind might be DeSantis, I won't be upset by that. Any other thoughts or questions?
Sure. One of the stated goals for this One Book, One Town project is productive dialogue. So how do you personally navigate a respectful dialogue with persons who really disagree with your point of view?
I mean, that is always the challenge. And I always sort of said, when I was sort of, as an author, I was on a lot of censorship panels early on. And I was often with Laurie Halsey Anderson and Ellen Hopkins, two incredible authors and incredible women, who had like diametrical answers to the question of sort of, what do you do with the other side? Because Laurie would be like, well, I'm a preacher's daughter. Like, I feel you have to sit down, break bread with them, listen to them, sort of find your commonality and go from there. And then Ellen would be like, look, if they are like refusing you the right to exist as who you are, you don't actually owe them anything. And like, I feel that I've always tried to navigate the middle ground between those two positions, because I do think, strangely, there is a way to agree with both of those positions. I think that it is trying to be respectful, and making sure that you can tell the difference between somebody who is challenging the book from a place of fear. I mean, again, when I started, there were definitely moments when I would be talking to somebody who genuinely thought their son would go to hell if they read my book. And again, like I think that's wrong, but I do respect that concern and that fear. And to dismiss it would have been the wrong thing to do. You have to listen to it and say, I hear what you're saying, but I genuinely don't believe that is what happens to us. And again, will that change anybody's mind? Maybe not. But at least you've had that dialogue, and maybe you plant a seed later on for that person's son if they do come out, that the parent will be like, oh, well, I remember talking to that author who seemed respectful, so maybe there is a way to grow up gay and not go to hell. Again, now, because it is more political, it is actually harder, because I don't feel that a lot of the attacks are sincere or coming from a genuine concern. I think they are trying to score political points. And again, I don't want to be dismissive. I think you have to sort of suss out the other side and again, sort out the people who have genuine concern from the people who are just trying to score points. The people who have genuine concern, again, I think you have to talk to them and just sort of try to address the concern as best as you can, knowing full well you might not change their mind. But for the people who are just cynically doing it to score points and be divisive, again, I feel you don't actually owe them anything except to fight back and to just say that what you're doing is wrong and this is why. And again, they have a playbook, and I think we have to counter that playbook as best as we can, because what they're doing can be a mobilizing thing for communities. And I think that there is a mistaken idea that sort of mobilizing to counter the people who are attacking is divisive in itself. But I think actually what it ends up doing is it does cause a lot of like-minded people to sort of stand up for what they believe in, and for people to realize that, again, in communities, by and large, the people who really, really want to ban books and burn books and shut down libraries and shut down public schools, that is absolutely a minority view. But sometimes, because they're loudest, we can believe that that is the majority. And I think by people coming together and talking and saying no, like again, while I agree that a book like Two Boys Kissing should not be in a 4th grade class, I also don't believe that we should stop having a library in the elementary school because it was mistakenly shelved there. So again, I think it is trying to have as much dialogue as possible, but if they are not respecting you, don't spend your energy trying to convince them or counter them. Work on something proactive rather than reactive.
I think the important piece there is to speak to the fear. You really have to identify why they have this position. You can't really have a healthy discussion with somebody if it's just about, well, this is what I believe, this is what you believe. What's your concern? What's the fear about moving forward with this? Because then you can actually start to have a meaningful dialogue about not my position, your position, but what's the reality. You know, a lot of times what I've really learned to do when people question being gay or indoctrination or whatever else, listen, I was completely indoctrinated and acculturated in a straight world. If you talk about, you know, trying to convert somebody, it didn't work. I had straight parents, straight siblings. I lived in a straight society. Guess what? You can't take the gay out of a gay man. So the fear is just, you know, that's the thing that I found most helpful. And I share this with kids in my counseling practice at the high school is turn it around on people, you know. When they say, when did you decide to be gay? Just say, when did you decide to be straight? Did anybody make a decision to be straight? No, it's an awareness. It's not a decision. We all come to some sort of awareness about your attraction to other people and what brings the joy in your life. So, you know, it's just, I think the easiest thing to combat any of that stuff is to turn it around immediately, reflect the question back. You know, listen, I'd be happy to tell you when I became aware of when I was gay. You tell me when you made the decision to be straight.
We are at 8:07. We appreciate the extra few minutes
All
and
right.
if you'd like to post up some remarks for us or.
Sure. No, I mean, again, I think that, again, I think it all comes back to books being devices of empathy. And I think that, again, what I love about books is that there's no way for a book to force itself on you. You have to choose to take it in. If you disagree with it, you can put it down. But by and large, when you're in it, you are exposed to different things. And so many of us have learned so much from the stories that we've read. And I think that trying to limit that, again, is futile. And I don't think there is a way at this point to stop certain stories from being told, and certain identities from being out there in the world. And I think that again, what we have to do to defend these books is all be in it together. And I think that I was recently at the Bologna Book Fair in Italy, sort of talking to publishers from around the world about what's going on in America. And a lot of them were saying, oh, it can't happen in our country. And I was like, just you wait. The far right in your country is looking at the far right in our country. And if this playbook works here, it's going to spread. So you should be concerned. But the good news is that the chain of people that is defending these books is a very, very strong chain. And we have all worked generations to put this chain together to make sure that these books hold. It is publishers, it is authors, it is librarians, it is teachers, it is students, it is parents. There are so many people who are invested in the freedom to read. And I think there are many more people who are invested in the freedom to read than there are invested in the notion of taking away the freedom to read. And sometimes, again, with the news and different states and different laws, it can feel like the opposite, but that's not actually true. But what is important is, as Donovan learns, to use our voice. I use my voice both within my books and then doing events like this or going to Bologna and talking about it. But it's much more important on the local level to use your voice and to have those conversations and to find the people who agree with you, and make sure that your voices are being heard. Because again, a lot of the times noise can overpower volume of people. And I think that there is a volume of us there who believe in intellectual freedom. So again, I think it's good to have the conversations. Again, if I leave you with one thing, I do think it is that the kitchen table is just as important as the big meeting, because I think that most of us do our best work at the kitchen table. And I think that is where both the change has occurred, and I think that is where the support for readers and support for books and support for students mostly is important to them to see at the kitchen table as well as in the big venues. So hopefully this has felt like, even though it has this rotating owl that has done very strange things which you cannot see, hopefully this has felt like a visit to the kitchen table more than it's felt like a kitchen to the board meeting. And hopefully you all will take away something from it too.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, David.
Thank you so much, David. We really appreciate your time. It's been a gift for us, for our community, and we just can't say thank you enough for being with us.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure being here. I will now log off so you guys can start to talk about what you really thought about the book. All right. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
And thank you guys so much for coming.